Welcome everybody, and this is another edition of 10-Minute Happy Hour. My name is Happy Kambule, and with all protocols observed, let's get into the show. First and foremost, the ANC won the elections by 57%. That's a drastic drop from what they had in 2014. The EFF and the Freedom Front Plus came up as the biggest winners, including the ACM and the Good Party, which all got upwards types of votes and increases in terms of their memberships and their support. The biggest losers, of course, are the ANC as well as the DA, although they are number one and number two with all the votes counted in. With all that said, let's just recap on what we spoke about last time. Last time we looked at the different political parties' manifestos and how they align with environmental policies and what they should be necessarily identifying. This time around, what we'll be looking at is all the collective political party manifestos as they were represented and what they should be doing as they are going into parliament. Particularly, what are the main gaps and what will happen if those gaps are not filled, and what we should do in order to fill those gaps, and what those political parties should do to fill those gaps. In that case, arabakene, asibangene, let's get into it. What are the gaps? The first gap that we've identified is that all of them, none of them, have mentioned what carbon reductions they're going to be doing. Let me be more specific. Some political parties say that there's a percentage decrease in terms of the carbon emissions by a certain year. Some say that they're going to continue reducing to a certain amount. However, the more important information is how you're going to do that. With all the institutions as well as the powers that you'll be granted when you get into parliament, as well as becoming part of the executive, you're gonna have to be able to design policies and programs in order to affect that. Nothing has been mentioned on that. Number two, air pollution is something of a missing link within all of the political party manifestos. In fact, what we're talking about that there is no commitment in reducing and addressing air pollution effectively. The third one is around renewable energy. Globally, as we know, that there's a big shift from fossil fuel generation, whether it's for liquid fuels as well as for electricity and heating. Primarily, renewable energy is the thing that is necessitating the transition because economically, environmentally, and politically, it makes sense. But our political parties don't think it's that important because why? The mineral energy complex of South Africa is still coal-based. The fourth thing is around the actual planning for renewable energy to be produced and distributed. There's an artificial limit around South Africa concerning renewable energy, which means that when the planning processes in order to develop and deploy renewables is being undertaken, a certain cap is placed on renewables. Not only in that context, but also who can produce and who can provide it. The fifth one is around single-use plastics. We're not talking about all plastics. First and foremost, there is no mention of single-use plastics, it's a tongue twister, plastics as a concern, primarily because aesthetically it's a problem, but also because it is a huge pollution issue. But nothing is mentioned in that regard. Only some political parties say it is of concern, nothing more beyond that. The sixth one, what we should term is around climate mitigation and adaptation. Biodiversity loss as well as biodiversity loss concerning coastal as well as wetland areas. Nothing along that because those are the critical issues. When climate adaptation needs to be undertaken, it basically means that we are able to adapt to the situations which are presented to us due to climate change. Nothing, zilch, zero, nix was mentioned. And the last one, the biggest out of all of those, is the issue around the coal transition. Removing ourselves from coal towards renewables. How are we going to support the communities that are the most vulnerable to that transition towards the renewables? Not only are we talking about people who are already employed, but people who would also be seeking employment and need to enter the workforce. Nothing, zilch. The only thing that did come out, or which was a dud from one of the manifestos, is that there is something that is happening around the just transition and it will be supported. And our political class has not elaborated even further. So what will happen if the gaps are not addressed? What will happen when all these environmental concerns become more and more prevalent? So the IPCC last year in 2018 released a report which basically looked at if one temperature increase, maybe let's say 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees happens, there'll be certain impacts being felt globally and at a regional level. Basically, what the IPCC says is that if there is 1.5 degree and more warming, we will have about 17% less fresh water to drink. And this is at a global level. And if we're talking about South Africa, we're talking about less water. So no more wine, basically. No more grapes. No more citrus. And basically no bananas. And I love bananas. If we don't have bananas, we're going to have problems. And then, concerning wheat and our crop production, our food security will be at risk. Wheat production will go down by 17%, and maize production will go down by 6%. And maize is a staple crop in South Africa. It means that if our production goes down, we need to import more. And if we're going to import more, it costs more. And if more countries can't actually be able to grow this, it means that maize might be something that we can no longer afford or have in the country. Another impact is that most coastal cities will be underwater because sea level rise is going to rise between 50 centimeters to 1 meter. And that's a lot, and that's just the average. So some cities will have a lot more, and some cities will have a lot less. Another impact is that we'll have one more month or 1.5 more months of warming, meaning that the heat waves that we're experiencing will be a lot more and a lot more prevalent. The intensity, of course, will be higher, and that means that people who are vulnerable to heat waves will suffer even more, meaning small children and elderly people, particularly in areas which don't have any central cooling or don't have any form of vegetation to help with the heating. When we're looking at coral reefs around the sea area, what we will find is that there will be massive fish losses, and coral reefs will almost be extinct or removed due to the fact that there will be a high prevalence of bleaching. So all of that is at a global level. That is more the aggregated figures. Let's go down closer home to Southern Africa. So within Southern Africa, what we're going to find is something that we saw within the past 2 months. More cyclones, more extreme weather events, where Kenneth and Idai are basically common. We're going to have them at a more seasonal and more intense rate. What we're also going to find is that we'll have varying types of extreme events. At one time, we have a drought-like condition or droughts, and then on the other hand, we have a flood. At the same time, in different areas, particularly maybe in different countries, but also in different regions of the same country. Concerning air pollution, let's step away a little bit from climate change, is that the air pollution concerns that we have will basically become more prevalent. All the cities, all the communities that are downwind, as well as those who are located close to the industries that are causing air pollution, will basically be getting more and more ill. Health risks as well as probably well-being will be at risk. What we will find is that respiratory diseases, and that's English, is lung cancer, bronchitis, and asthma becoming more and more of a thing that is common. And that is only as a result of not addressing just a single issue, air pollution. Let's move over to plastics. With plastics, what we will actually see more of is that the things that we eat, the things that we see, the things that we love because they're aesthetically pleasing are becoming less so. Particularly looking at fish. The fish that we have tend to eat the plastic that we leave on the ground, which goes down into the ocean and into our riverbeds. And those things become part of the fish. And then we eat those, and then suddenly we are ill. We're going to lose a lot of fish, meaning that a lot of people will not have something which is key to their diet. Secondly, our environment is going to be deposited with a lot more heavy chemicals, which means that the earth is unusable due to the fact that it is contaminated. When they get into parliament, the guys and the girls and the big men and women, what they need to be doing is addressing the gaps that we have already identified collectively. The first thing that they need to do, at least to address the situation, because this is a bad situation, is ban single-use plastics. How do you do that? You basically either amend existing legislation or you create a new law that bans single-use plastics from either distribution as well as being the supplier and producer of single-use plastics. We can talk later about what happens up to the plastics that we already have. But there's a great example of how you can take action, and it looks something like this.
I think we all know what the right thing is to do, but what we need is for those vested with power, the people that we elect, to legislate against single-use plastic. And this is why we are handing over this petition to you today. And again, we are very grateful that you made the time to receive us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Number 2, the National Air Quality Officer cannot grant more postponements to air quality standards. Basically, it means that the air quality officer who's in charge of determining what standards are and who should comply with them, at what rate, should not be letting these people go, should not let compliance go. Basically, what she needs to do is to strengthen and ensure that compliance occurs, and as well as strengthen the already existing national air quality standards in line with the global standards. At a provincial level, the provincial legislatures need to start to recognize industrial air pollution as a concern, as a human rights violation, and start to develop programs as well as oversight initiatives in order to stop industrial air pollution. When we move over to what the provincial government should be also doing, is that we need to focus on coal communities particularly, not only at an industrial pollution level, but also at the associated impacts due to the fact of the transition. This might be a national concern, but particularly the powers are vested within the functionaries of the provincial government and the provincial legislature. So what that means is that coal communities that are already being affected by the transition, as well as those that are going to be affected by renewable energy coming into the grid a lot more, should be taken care of and should have something that is developed in order to address their vulnerabilities. So let's switch back to the national government and the national parliament. So nationally, we need to remove the limits on renewable energy. Basically, everything that is a barrier on renewable energy should be upended. For one, the Electricity Regulation Act needs to be able to mandate households, commerce, industry, and everybody to be able to produce renewable energy of any kind, particularly renewable energy, using rooftops and other forms of surfaces. The second part is that within the integrated planning process, we need to remove the cap on renewables, meaning that the model that is employed, including the methodology, needs to recognize the potential of renewable as it is technically and economically feasible. The next thing that needs to be addressed is the decommissioning of power plants. We need to accelerate the decommissioning of power plants that are not working. When we remove the limitations on renewable energy as well as decommissioning plants, what we need to also look at is actually expanding the mandate of Eskom to build beyond coal and nuclear. There is a great market as well as there's great demand for deploying as well as feeding renewable energy into the grid. It makes no sense why the public utility that is Eskom cannot do so. So that mandate needs to be expanded. Let's move on further and address one of the more critical issues, which is basically the IPCC's recommendations. The IPCC recommendations basically state that all countries that have a contribution towards the Paris Agreement, which is our nationally determined contribution, our pledge, our commitment to address climate change, needs to be enhanced, which needs to be enhanced in line with the IPCC recommendations. Another measure that needs to be taken, as it is constitutionally enshrined, is that of public participation and consultation. Communities that are vulnerable as well as those that are impacted by climate change need to be part of the process of developing the management, disaster management, as well as the development of all policies that concern their vulnerability. So this act basically needs to look at how communities can take ownership of what they need to do in order to address climate change. But last and not least, what the National Assembly needs to do is make a pronouncement. Well, first of all, the pronouncement needs to come from the president to say that we're in a climate crisis. But the National Assembly needs to make a motion and then pass a motion that says we're in a climate crisis. We're in a climate emergency, and we're not the only ones talking about this. There are many other organizations, and around the world, many governments are starting to realize that we're in a crisis and we are no longer in business as usual. So, what can you do? I am so sorry, but this is very sad, what has happened before. But there is things that we can do. There is hope. There is a measure that we can take. 3 steps which are very easy to enable us to get to the next step where we can be much more mobilized. The first step is that you can politically organize yourself around the issues that you are concerned with. This doesn't mean doing a whole lot of things. It's basically making sure that what you are concerned with is addressed. There are various processes that can be undertaken at a local level, meaning at a municipal and a provincial level, and there are various other ways which this can be taken at a national level. The second part is almost similar, but it's highly different because this is about directly communicating with your representative to be able to make sure that public opinion reflects what you are dealing with, what you want to be addressed, and what you believe needs to be done. The best thing you can do is join us here at Greenpeace Africa. We've got many volunteer groups in Durban, in Johannesburg, and in Cape Town. We together can hold these people accountable, and we're looking for your support. So today, what we looked at is who's going into parliament, right? We also looked at what are the gaps that all of these people have in their thinking. We also looked at what we should be doing in order to address those things, as well as how you and I can get involved in order to put pressure on these people to do what is necessary. Because if we don't do this and they do not address these issues, what we will have is more food insecurity and extreme weather events, and our health will be at risk. In the coming episodes, we're going to be looking at a number of things, not only macro politics, but also issues such as what or who is in the new executive, as well as what the new executive needs to do, primarily around environment and as well as the energy complex. And then we're also going to update you on issues such as COP25 and World Environment Day and the various issues that are coming out. But particularly, we're going to use this segment in order to update you on political developments that are not necessarily well known and are impacting on your life as well as the right to an environment. Okay. That's it. That's it for today's show. And please remember to subscribe to the show and hit that notification button. My name is Happy Kambule, and this has been 10 Minute Happy Hour. See you next time.